The tribunal chamber was vast, polished obsidian floors, cascading light from suspended rings, and 10 beings perched on elevated thrones. Each represented a core member of the Galactic Concord. They did not shout, did not fume. That was not their way. Their verdict was delivered with clinical finality. Catalog Code P43R, intoned High Adjudicator Silax of the Van Dominion, his mandibles twitching in feigned regret. Remains under observation, Doctrine 7. Do not engage, do not assist, do not interfere. On the lower dais, the Terran envoy didn't speak. She simply lowered her hands. Her palms still held traces of red dust from the Martian fallback shelters, and her voice, once firm, was hollow now. 27,000 civilians died in the Lagrange corridor. The raiders used Concord-licensed weaponry. Silax didn't look at her. He looked through her. Earth lacks sufficient strategic value for intervention. With that, her transmission was severed. Elsewhere, deep in the artificial gravity well of Europa's Shadowside installation, Admiral Joran Marr watched the verdict play out on a silent display screen. His hand remained suspended over the pause command for a few seconds longer than necessary. The words hung in the room. He'd heard them before, but repetition didn't blunt the insult. It sharpened it. Earth. Insufficient value. Just noise. Marr stood, not in defiance, not in fury, in purpose. He had not always been in uniform. Once, long ago, he had lectured on quantum theory inside the crumbling domes of post-collapse Geneva. He had spent half his life arguing with theoretical models, and the other half convincing broken governments to fund them. But when Earth was denied aid during the Hecaton siege, when rescue requests were buried beneath Concordian audit cycles, Marr had traded the chalkboard for command stripes. Now those stripes felt heavy on his shoulder, not because of the burden, but because he knew what they would soon mean. He tapped a control panel and brought up the footage from Neptune's Lagrange corridor. Burned-out relay satellites spinning uselessly, outposts turned to husks, and final transmission logs ending mid-scream. No weapons had been deployed in response, no defense satellites activated. Why would they? Earth's early warning system was routed through Concord nodes, and those nodes had quietly gone dormant. The screen showed a Martian evacuation transport trailing plasma fire before disintegrating into 3 unsalvageable pieces. A child's scream, muffled but unmistakable, bled through the static before the recording collapsed into blankness. He closed the footage. He didn't speak. Instead, he reached toward the console embedded into the wall, a narrow slot accessible only to Concord liaisons. His biometric imprint still worked. The display shimmered. Access. Diplomatic credentials. Joran Marr. Class. Quantum Elevated Technical Advisor. Terran Division. The system responded in perfect neutrality. Credentials recognized. Options. Renew. Modify. Revoke. Mad didn't hesitate. He selected the final option. As the system prepared deletion, it offered a final verification prompt, as though urging him to reconsider. He didn't. A quiet confirmation tone followed, his diplomatic presence across the Concord lattice erased, just like that. He turned back to the viewport, staring at Jupiter's swirling storms. Even out here in the deep cold of Sol's outskirts, he could feel the heat of that word. Nyoga. It wasn't even an insult. That would have required intention. No, this was worse. It was indifference, wearing the clothes of bureaucracy. An entire planet's grief dismissed as background static. But noise, Marr thought, has properties. It carries. It accumulates. It demands filtering. And sometimes, when you amplify it just right, it becomes signal. He looked down at the encrypted datapad on his desk, untouched for years. Project Helix. A research model, buried beneath decades of academic disinterest. It was never designed for propulsion. It was about repositioning, reframing mass within anchored gravitational wells. On paper, useless for conflict, but Ma was no longer bound by paper. He placed a hand on the pad. There were no grand declarations, no fiery speeches, no orders barked. Just a whisper, spoken not in rage but in precision. At noise. And with that, Admiral Joran Ma began to disappear. The sky above Earth dimmed, not from weather or orbital shadows, but from something far quieter. Withdrawal. It began without speeches, without declarations of martial order or civil panic. One by one, orbital factories stopped spinning. Supply lines went dark. Agricultural satellites, once bloated with data pulses, returned nothing but dead air. The global economy didn't collapse overnight. It simply stopped answering. To outsiders, Earth looked like it was dying. Cities dimmed. Power grids were throttled to essential sectors. Financial markets, what remained of them, closed in synchronized silence. Civilian broadcasts fell into loops. Even the media arms of off-world colonies began to speculate. Was Earth finally done? But below the silence, behind every flickering light and shuttered comm tower, something else stirred. Admiral Ma stood inside an ancient power relay station beneath the Mariana Trench shelf, the floor rumbling with systems long dormant. A team of engineers, hands slick with ocean-condensed grit, reconnected buried cores into the central processor of a project humanity had once called impossible. Helix. Ma didn't pace. He wasn't a general on a tour. He was a man returning to an old notebook. And this time, the universe had given him reason to finish what he started. Years ago, before Earth was cut from the Concorde's attention span, Ma had proposed Helix not as a travel mechanism, but as a repositioning strategy. He theorized that anchored gravitational wells, carefully mapped, precisely aligned, could create displacement windows. Not wormholes, not jumps, not FTL magic, just quiet, seamless shift of position without motion. He called it folding from stillness. It had been laughed out of funding chambers. Too slow, too complex, too theoretical. Now, with no one left to laugh, the silence welcomed his return. The engineers finished alignment. The first activation test, barely measurable, caused a minor tremor under the trench. It wasn't impressive, it wasn't beautiful, it was functional. "That's it?" one of the younger techs asked, brushing sweat from his temple. "Doesn't look like anything moved." Ma placed a single metallic coin on the cold console. He tapped a control. The lights dimmed for a breath, and when they returned, the coin was gone. No flash, no sound, just absence. The room went silent. Then came the shuffling of boots as specialists leaned in, double-checked instruments, ran diagnostics. The coin hadn't disintegrated. It hadn't shifted molecules. It had moved. Ma folded his arms. "We're not moving faster than light. We're just not playing by its rules." The phrase caught. Within weeks, Helix cores were seeded across Earth's dead zones, uninhabited stretches of tundra, seafloor beds, abandoned lunar mining shafts. Cities became staging grounds. But they weren't arming themselves with battleships or plasma relays. They were being emptied. Entire districts were evacuated, the populations redirected into deep-ground infrastructure designed with Helix junction compatibility. Even the crust above their heads was retrofitted. Armored, heat-shielded, sensor scattering. What satellites remained saw only collapse. They weren't wrong. On the surface, Earth looked forsaken. The streets of New Montreal cracked under ivy. The floating towers of Lagos flickered one by one before going dark entirely. Old Shanghai's orbit coupler crumpled without resistance. The Concour's distant observation nodes logged the decline with bureaucratic indifference. Civilization regression event, stage 4. But in the dark below, Earth wasn't dying. It was hardening. Ma stood before the Terran Defense Command, not in a chamber, not through a screen, but deep in the seismic locked vault beneath Antarctica, where signal bleed was impossible. Only 22 remained in the room. Scientists, strategists, defected Concord officers who had chosen silence over applause. He didn't deliver a speech. He gave a confirmation. "We're not building a fleet," he said calmly, his voice echoing off the concrete. "We're building a future they'll never see coming." A pause. "They think our silence is failure, that our stillness is surrender. They see empty skylines and abandoned orbital rings and think we've collapsed." He let the words hang. Let them. One of the lead tacticians, a former Concord conflict analyst named Alaric, raised a brow. "They'll notice eventually." Ma looked at him evenly. "Not if we're already there when they do." That was the core of Helix, pre-positioning. It wasn't about waging a war Earth couldn't win by numbers. It was about denying the Concord the very thing it used to dominate, the ability to anticipate. Earth wouldn't deploy fleets. It would place them, not in pursuit, but in arrival. As Earth retreated from the visible universe, its helix lattice expanded, like veins beneath frozen skin. Junctions were mapped to Lagrange points, deep orbit shadows, gravitational nulls behind rogue asteroids. Every move was made in silence. Not a single frequency spike was detected. Concord sensors reported only decay, entropy, silence. Perfect. The civilian population, once scattered across orbital habitats and outworld trade zones, was redirected with surgical precision. They were not told the whole truth, only that Earth was entering a preservation phase. Some protested, some didn't return. That was acceptable. Those who came underground became part of something far larger than survival. They became the unknown. The blackside bunkers were unlike anything humanity had built before. Each functioned as a distributed processing node, sensory veil, and displacement-ready hold. Thousands lived in complete silence, training not for combat, but for calculation. Earth's new tacticians weren't bred from war academies. They were children raised inside pattern recognition labs, trained to think not 2 moves ahead, but 1,000. Inside a vault beneath Greenland, a child barely 13 solved a simulation in 4 minutes that Ma himself had failed to crack 20 years ago. She didn't smile at her success. She just nodded and asked for the next scenario. By the 4th year, Earth had gone from silence to design. By the 6th, it had become architecture. By the 7th, it was ready. Ma didn't mark the anniversary. He didn't attend the silent ceremony held beneath the Pacific Helix arc. He stood alone above the Mariana node, watching as the final lattice calibration turned from red to green. He reached into his coat and pulled out a second metallic coin. This one bore the crest of the Conquest tribunal. He didn't speak. He had just placed it on the console, tapped the control, and let it vanish. The Mariana node wasn't visible from orbit. That was the point. It sat more than 11 kilometers beneath the Pacific, buried in a bed of basaltic crust, reinforced with plasma-shielded lattice and neuroreactive alloys that adapted to water pressure in real time. To the Concord's remote scans, it looked like a dead geothermal vent, an ancient scar on a dying world. But inside, beneath layers of silence and cold, the heart of Earth's new doctrine pulsed to life. They worked without time markers, without day or night. Ma had ordered the station clocks removed entirely. There would be no cycles to count, no shifts to mark, only progress. The Helix engineers had learned to work by neural sync, predictive task drift, and pulse-dampened coordination boards. Instructions weren't barked or spoken, they were transferred through shared cognitive threads, uploaded, enacted, erased. 1,000 men and women moved inside the darkness, drilling, welding, mapping gravitational fault lines. Every layer of construction was shaped not for strength, but for signal concealment. The Concord had always measured threats by emissions, heat spikes, magnetic surges, radiation bleeds. so Ma gave them none. Earth's silence wasn't an absence, it was camouflage. Deep in the core chamber, Ma walked the spiral scaffold toward the observation deck. His boots echoed softly against the steel, the sound swallowed quickly by the acoustic null panels lining the walls. Through the thick, transparent alloy, he looked down at the helix spine, a series of interlocking rings suspended in magnetic stabilizations, each one aligned with gravitational nodal equations derived from his earliest models. The rings were humming, not audibly, but in frequency. There was a kind of pressure in the air, not oppressive, but constant. Ma could feel it in his molars, in the fine bones behind his ears. Earth's first true helix gate was almost fully spun. He reached for the control pad embedded in the wall and accessed the live calibration logs. No Concorde surveillance arrays had pinged a single anomaly. No long-range observatories had flagged orbital motion or energy distortion. Earth was moving pieces across the board, and no one had even noticed the game had started. Beyond the trench, in the cold outer dark, nodes were already live. The Kuiper Belt anchors had taken 2 years to deploy. Drones disguised as asteroid miners, each one carrying displacement cores nested in ice layers to mask thermal output. They had dug themselves in, boring into orbital bodies so insignificant the Concorde didn't bother tracking them anymore. On official records, Earth's mining operations had ceased. But each abandoned site was now part of a lattice, threaded, coordinated, and synced to Mariana's pulse. There were dozens of such nodes. Some rotated in isolation behind dead moons, some drifted in dark space between Neptune and scattered Kuiper debris, and some were mobile. The drone, officially named Theta 9, sat cold in low orbit above Earth for 9 seconds before activation. It had no weapons, no signals, no propulsion systems the Conquered could read, just a displacement core tuned to the new helix lattice and a synthetic alloy hull capable of withstanding translocational friction. On the console before Ma, a single command flashed: fold test. Authorized jump. No engineers surrounded him. No countdowns echoed. There was no one to witness it, but the system itself. Ma pressed execute. For 0,007 seconds, Theta 9 vanished. Not moved, not sped, simply disappeared. Its data relay pinged milliseconds later from orbit above Saturn's moon Enceladus, transmitting full positional sync, damage report, none, and time distortion delta delta Earth. From Earth's atmosphere to Saturn's ring shadow, without acceleration, without light, without alert. The test had succeeded. No Concorde long-range listening posts reacted, no security pulses flagged. Earth had placed an object within deep space orbit faster than the Concorde could measure motion. "Travel is noisy," Ma muttered, watching the Saturn relay light up with signal. "Placement is quiet." He recorded that in his private log, a secure data slate locked behind triple-encrypted quantum rotors. It wasn't for publication, it wasn't for pride, it was just to remember. Back in the lower deck, a technician named Harlow removed his Neuralink headset and exhaled. His palms trembled slightly. "That's it, sir. Fold profile confirmed. Calibration rates within expected drift margin." Ma nodded. "Reset the drone. Wipe its shell. I want it ghosted." Harlow hesitated. "We just placed a unit across 2 planets in less time than light can think. Shouldn't we mark it?" Ma turned to face him fully. "We don't need monuments. We need vanishing points." That same day, Earth's Defense Command approved the next phase. The Mariana node was no longer a proof of concept. It was now the primary central tether of Earth's helix web. The lattice expanded in all directions: polar anchor points beneath the South Pole, tunnel-bored helix ports beneath the crust of the Andes, deep bay facilities under Greenlandic ice flows. Everywhere the Concorde had ignored, Earth planted seeds. By the end of the 6th year, 38 nodes were operational. By the end of the 7th, Earth could place up to 12 ships simultaneously at targets scattered across a 100 million kilometer radius, without any travel time, without any warning. The Helix web didn't move Earth's ships, it positioned them. And still, from the outside, Earth remained a tomb. Concord monitors, bored by the long absence of drama, had reclassified Earth's observation status to passive dormancy. Their analysts saw no heat bloom, no launch spikes, no orbital shifts. They filed Earth away under neglected zones. It was perfect. Ma watched from Europa's deep orbital chamber as one of Earth's Helix-debated test frigates folded into Neptune's orbit, deployed a signal anchor, and vanished again, all within less than 1 second. No Concord sensor pinged, no system stirred. He stood alone in the dark. There was no audience, no applause, no war drums, only silence. Earth had become the world without witnesses, and that was exactly how Ma wanted it. The Vargathi Trade Authority didn't speak with volume. They didn't need to. The press statement came in the form of a slick data pulse sent to over 300 systems, embedded with diplomatic seals and econometric graphs to frame the narrative in civil tones. But the message behind the numbers was clear. "Containment is a courtesy," said High Merchant Saval during the opening broadcast. P-43 Rose collapse has become a point of fiscal volatility. We are not aggressors, we are regulators, and we believe in stability. Behind him, the holoscreen displayed Earth's recent orbital trendline. Exports down to zero, transit activity flatlined, known habitats showing no measurable energy output, dead on paper. Still, the Vargathi had learned not to take corpses at face value, especially when they came from a species with a knack for subversion. The blockade, they argued, was meant to prevent unforeseen escalations. The word embargo was never used, but the ships began forming by the cycle's end. By week 2, 37 Concord-aligned vessels ringed Sol space. Entry ports were locked, supply lanes rerouted. An entire arc of human-linked trade contracts were frozen under audit. The message was quiet, but not subtle. Stay where you are. Stay dead. Inside Earth's helix-wired bunkers, there were no alarms, no war rooms bursting into activity. Ma didn't issue any orders. The blockade wasn't a threat. It was a signal. At the Defense Corps under Greenland, the wall display quietly showed incoming Vargathi ship signatures aligning into a neat orbital mesh, like a lattice of iron bars being lowered onto a tomb. Officers watched without speaking. They already knew what was coming. It had been practiced, simulated, refined. The Helix fleet hadn't been built to launch. It was built to vanish. That evening, above the Mariana node, 17 Helix-excitable vessels hovered in precise alignment. Not dreadnoughts, not battleships, smaller, sleeker craft with hulls shaped not for armor but for manipulation. Gravitational sensors, data filter blades, neural intercept arrays. Each one was manned by only 2 or 3 people at most. Each one had no signal core, no propulsion trails, no flight plan. And each one folded in silence. No flash, no warning. One moment, Earth's orbit showed activity. The next, it showed emptiness. The Vargathi flagged it as a sensor error, a diagnostic anomaly. They recalibrated their wide sweep arrays and adjusted gravimetric filters. Nothing changed. Above the Vargathi dry docks in the Zaxor belt, 6 vessels materialized at once. They didn't fire, they didn't move, they simply appeared. Nested between dock scaffolds, adjacent to power nexuses, locked into proximity with Concord fleet management cores. Technicians on board the Vargathi superstation Zel 3X froze mid-tack. For several seconds, the Helix ships didn't even register as threats. They weren't emitting weapons signatures. They weren't radiating heat. They were just there. As a senior operations officer tapped a command to raise shields, nothing happened. The station's energy core flickered once, then dropped. Not from a strike, not from overload. It was as if the power had decided to leave. Control panels blanked. Mobility arrays froze mid-cycle. External turrets rotated once, then locked in place. Entire wings of the dry dock fell into silent stasis. Inside the command bridge, Admiral Rosenthal of the Vargathi struggled to reassert internal override. He barked orders across a dead comm channel while staring at the closest Terran vessel, a smooth silver blade of a ship, hovering only 50 meters away. It did not move. It did not acknowledge. He watched as its hull seemed to shimmer with no light source, its surface absorbing starlight rather than reflecting it. The ship had no windows, no markings, only a small crest that flickered for half a second, a Terran sigil last used before Earth's economic seclusion. Rosen's hands trembled over the interface. "Raise planetary relays. I want system-wide alert." "No relay access," his comm officer whispered, pale. "We're not broadcasting." Bowsen clenched his jaw. "Then send an internal drone. I want—" The bridge lights dimmed. For the next 7 minutes, the entire Zaxor Belt hub became still. Every internal process frozen. Every hierarchy loop rendered inert. No one fired, no one fell. There were no explosions, no plasma waves, no bodies. Just an entire Concord military-industrial station turned off. Across 7 other Vargati sites, the same thing happened. Each one flickered. On no schedule, Earth had announced, and each time the result was total disengagement. Systems collapsed not through damage, but through surgical separation. Their energy cores weren't drained. They were bypassed. Command functions weren't hacked. They were redirected into infinite loops. Ma didn't contact anyone. No message was issued, no ultimatum. Only silence. Back on Earth, the systems watched from the Mariana Node's observation core. Each flicker, each collapse, each vanishing signal from the Concord's containment line was logged. Not as a victory, but as a displacement. Ma stood at the center console, reading the data without triumph. He didn't speak until one of the lieutenants looked up from the stream and asked quietly, "Should we broadcast a declaration?" Ma turned, his face unreadable. "Declarations are for those who want recognition." Another officer shifted uncomfortably. "Then, what do they think happened?" Ma stared at the dark space above Earth, where the containment fleet had once lingered. "They'll think they've been infiltrated, sabotaged, betrayed. They'll start interrogating their own command logs, their own allies." He paused. "And they'll be wrong." The lieutenant swallowed. "And if they strike back?" Ma answered flatly. "Then we place them somewhere they can't strike from." The chamber fell into quiet agreement. Later that cycle, the Concord's economic sector submitted a flagged emergency report to its central tribunal. The Vargathi Trade Authority had experienced unprecedented systems collapse across multiple sites. No enemy activity confirmed, no causal data retrieved, no statement issued from Earth, no footage captured. The report labeled the event anomalous containment breach. It recommended escalation, but escalation requires clarity, and Earth had given them only void. The Concord's retaliation came not as a formal vote or a diplomatic memo, but as an announcement wrapped in spectacle. Broadcasts flooded across core link systems, the tribunal seal pulsing behind High Adjudicator Vexar's spindled shoulders. He wore the ceremonial robes of wartime arbitration, a relic reserved for public punishments, not actual conflict. The gesture wasn't meant for Earth. It was meant for everyone watching. "This is not a declaration of war," Vexar said, voice calm, clipped, and utterly composed. "This is a corrective act, a measured deterrent, for stability's sake." Behind him, a live stream played from orbit above Titan. The camera feed zoomed in on Saturn's moon as the strike fleets realigned in full view. 33 Concorde dreadnoughts flared to life in high orbit, their staging calculated to send a message to all outer colonies. Concorde could still act, would still act. The shelling began in perfect formation. Plasma lances rained down with surgical precision, cutting across dome settlements, old hydroponic silos, and the abandoned mag-rail spine that once ferried civilians to subsurface living sectors. Dust bloomed in slow, silent waves across the moon's methane surface, billowing out in surreal arcs under Titan's muted gravity. Entire complexes cracked and shattered as if turned to ash. The camera didn't blink. Neither did the Concorde. They even slowed the footage down. And yet, the feed failed to mention the most important detail. Titan had already been empty for over a year. What the Concorde was destroying wasn't a hub of Terran infrastructure. It was a hollow shell. A ghost. Earth had vacated the colony in silence, rerouting its population through helix gates under artificial eclipses and ice storms months before the first Concorde surveillance drone had noticed Titan's power output dip. All that Concorde shelled were empty chambers and scorched memories. But to the public eye, it looked like power, justice, discipline. The tribunal closed the broadcast with a phrase meant to pierce, "Let this silence be permanent." They didn't know silence had already become Earth's weapon of choice. Because even as the Titan feed looped through Concorde news channels, something far quieter was happening in the core. In the Verdanis sector, the orbital towers above Serevan stalled mid-ascent. Not exploded, not fired upon, just stopped. 27 construction platforms, each half-finished and held in stasis by automated lifts, suddenly froze. Their gyroscopic stabilizers failed in perfect sequence. Fusion inputs blinked offline. The alloy limbs of the building cranes hung limp in open vacuum like snapped fingers, their artificial muscles no longer receiving orders. Engineers tried to run manual overrides, but the systems didn't reject them. They simply didn't acknowledge. On Cax 3, power grids hiccuped, then dimmed. First the agricultural blocks, then public transit, then atmospheric regulators. Across the cities, emergency sirens failed to activate. Diagnostic drones spiraled through a checklist that no longer looped, stalling mid-protocol. Hospitals fell into darkness not with a surge but a blink. No fire, no alarms, no enemy presence. Just systems folding inward as if tired of listening. Panic spread fast, and not because of destruction, but because no one could trace the cause. Planetary defense networks reported no inbound hostiles, no trajectory anomalies, no thermal spikes. It was like the infrastructure itself had given up. Like something buried in the code had reclassified its priorities without warning. In truth, that wasn't far off. Earth's Helix fleet had not fired a single shot. It hadn't needed to. It had simply arrived, threaded into Concorde space like spectral ligatures, unseen and unfelt until their presence became absence. They didn't disable from the outside, they interrupted from within. Most of the time, they weren't even visible. Above Thule Prime, a food replication array reset mid-second, deleting all caloric cues and triggering global fasting protocols. The failsafe did its job. Rations were distributed through mechanical fallback systems, but the implication hit harder than any blast. Someone could rewrite the survival baseline of an entire world with no visible entry. At 600 standard core time, every Concorde sector head received the same message. There was no encryption, no origin tag, just one line. "This isn't war, it's audit." Admiral Jorin Ma didn't sign the message. He didn't appear on screen. He didn't explain the meaning. He didn't need to. The phrase struck deeper than any overt threat. The Concorde understood audits. Their entire system thrived on them, used to justify sanctions, redistribute control, erase uncooperative voices behind veils of policy. Audit was the quiet violence of bureaucracy. Now, Earth was using their language, their method, their tools. Except Earth wasn't analyzing finances. It was cataloging atrocities and disconnecting them. On Europa, inside a cold stone vault wrapped in signal-dampening coils, Ma watched as global system feedback began feeding in. He did not celebrate. He didn't even nod. The data wasn't victory. It was a ledger. For every failed Concorde override, there was a matching entry. A Terran colony shelled, a dome shattered, a supply convoy denied. Ma had turned Helix into more than a fleet. He turned it into a method of memory. Placement wasn't just a tactical edge, it was proof. A ledger written in shadow, then deployed in light. A junior officer approached. "Sir, core systems are starting to theorize. They're blaming internal sabotage, rogue AI, even psionic interference." Ma didn't look away from the interface. "Let them." Another update flicked into place. "Seravan, infrastructure degradation, 96%, power redistribution, non-functional. CARX 3, civilian relocation underway, automated systems offline, public order fracturing. Tool prime. Trade halts, energy shortfall, rationing chaos." Ma placed a fingertip against the console, his voice barely audible. No impact needed, just interruption. A silence fell across the chamber. The junior officer hesitated. "Do we proceed to strike protocol?" Mard looked at him. Why strike something already collapsing?" he asked. "They never understood our silence. Let them learn its grammar." And just like that, Earth's quiet language spoke louder than fleets ever could. It began with a flicker. Small, almost unnoticeable. Across Concorde systems, embedded in the mundane scroll of news feeds and planetary advisories, a file began to appear. It bore no title, no seal, just a pulse, formatted to each system's standard media protocols, indistinguishable from the bureaucratic clutter Concorde officials ignored every cycle. But the moment the data slate was opened, there was no mistaking its origin. A black screen faded in. Then, a low-frequency tone, constant and resonant, like the hum of a ship's hull pressed against a storm. Then came the first image. Grainy footage of a Martian dome shattered inward, the camera lens partially fogged from a ruptured coolant leak. Civilians lay buried beneath the translucent shards of plasteel. A child's hand, half covered in frost, twitched once, then stilled. The next clip. A transport ship half submerged in Titan's methane snowdrift, black smoke curling out of its broken hull, no rescue crews, just the buzz of failing systems and the whisper of a woman's final broadcast, her voice breaking mid-plea. Another, then another. Hundreds of clips, stitched together not for drama but for sequence. Catalogued, dated, triangulated. Each came with a red-tinted caption in multiple dialects. Concorde orbital silence. 22 minutes. No response, no dispatch, no action taken. The footage continued. A refugee camp, mostly children and elderly, clustered beneath a solar tarp as windstorms whipped through the wreckage of their once habitable colony. Their food distribution array blinked, air channel closed. Beside it, a shattered communications mast blinked blue, looping a call for aid no one had ever answered. Over each clip came a different voice, male, female, synthetic, looped from the automated distress recordings filed and timestamped. Every message ended the same way. Signal lost, source reclassified, noise. The final clip in the sequence was raw, unfiltered. It showed a wide, panning view of Earth from low orbit, a once teeming planet now darkened, cloaked in shadow, its surface pockmarked with abandoned energy wells and failed infrastructure. Except this time, new lights appeared. Not surface cities, but arcs of subtle illumination forming geometric halos in the ocean and under the crust of a helix lattice. The footage paused. One final message appeared. This was not escalation. This was record-keeping. No signature followed, no anthem, just silence. But it was enough. Within hours, the file was opened in every major node across the Concorde's core worlds. At first, officials scrambled to dismiss it as forged, but the footage matched archived sensor data. The time-stamp synced with official log gaps. Most damning of all, the distress signals were found, still archived, still ignored. What Earth had released wasn't propaganda. It was proof. And it broke the Concorde. On Kelmaris Station, the governor of the Virek zone publicly resigned, live-streaming his confession. He had been ordered to suppress 4 of the signals shown in the footage to preserve intersystem morale. His voice trembled, sweat pouring down his forehead as he cited sealed orders from the central diplomatic matrix. When pressed by journalists, he simply repeated one phrase. They told us it was just noise. By the next cycle, 5 more governors had followed. On border colony Freyan 9, a civil rebellion detonated the Concorde resource nexus, cutting off fuel lines to the Avanti core. The leaders released their own footage. Stockpiles of unprocessed aid shipments designated for Earth, left to rot in transit silos under bureaucratic lockout. They declared formal disconnection from the Concorde and offered Earth unconditional corridor rights. Across dozens of smaller worlds, protests erupted. Not with chants or torches, but with disobedience. Trade routes refused to update tariffs. Orbital defense platforms shut down by choice. Independent networks, once suppressed by the Concorde's economic leash, rose with renewed purpose. Supply lines dissolved like tissue in acid. And then came the Avanti scandal. The Avanti Senate, long considered the most stable and rigid governing body in the Concorde hierarchy, cracked open in public disgrace. A whistleblower, an ex-senator's daughter, leaked transcripts revealing deliberate falsification of Earth's strategic valuation over a 10-year period. Earth had been downgraded not because it was unimportant, but because reclassification would have interrupted high-profit Vargati transit routes. The scandal exploded. Senators fled. One chancellor was arrested mid-broadcast. The remaining councillors attempted damage control, issuing blanket denials, but it was too late. Their feeds were flooded with citizen footage overlaying one image, Earth's crest, dim but unmistakable, rising through static. The Concorde didn't collapse in fire, it collapsed in shame. Above Europa, inside a viewing chamber layered in passive light filters, Ma stood with his hands behind his back. The screen before him showed 22 split feeds, each one cycling through real-time fallout. Resignations, infrastructure collapses, political excesses. He didn't speak. Behind him, a systems analyst turned from the console. "Sir, they're unraveling." Ma nodded once. The analyst hesitated. "Do we issue a follow-up?" Ma's eyes didn't move from the screens. "No." Sir. His voice was quiet but resolute. "They logged us as noise. Let them hear the frequency now." The analyst returned to the console, silent. Ma closed his eyes for a moment. Not in relief. Not in triumph. Bill pulsed beneath, but in completion. Every helix placement, every unspoken move, every hollowed city and buried data node had led to this. Not Earth's retribution, but its revelation. Humanity had not struck back in rage. It had held up a mirror. And the galaxy did not like what it saw. In the end, it wasn't fire that brought the Concorde to its knees. It was truth, broadcast not with fury, but with signal. Signal they had once dismissed. Now it screamed in every corridor of power. Avanti Prime had never known darkness. The planet's orbit was a chandelier of artificial light, a lattice of suspended data towers, floating broadcast nodes, orbital farms, and energy mirrors reflecting sunlight onto the capital's spires below. Even at midnight, the sky pulsed with white-blue veins of constant motion, a soft glow that never ceased, never flickered. It was the proudest symbol of the Concorde's mastery. Light without interruption, progress without pause, until it stopped. His ground account took through the core time. A single blink, barely perceptible to the untrained eye, a 1.6-second dip in Evanthi's central orbital sync, the kind that usually preceded a firmware update or traffic reroute, normal, dismissed. But then came the silence. One by one, the orbital mirrors failed to redirect. The comm spines dropped into stasis. Power grid stabilizers began to cycle, seeking feedback loops that no longer existed. The massive arcology-tethered networks that governed environmental control, trade logistics, and broadcast compliance simply stopped responding. Not malfunctioning, not jammed. From the capital below, the towers looked intact, still floating, still aligned, but their illumination had vanished. Evanti Prime's sky, for the first time in 3 centuries, turned black. No alerts had been triggered, no weapons were detected. There had been no entries logged, not even a micropulse of unauthorized gravimetric activity. Just darkness. In the Prime Senate chamber, silence rippled like a tide. Screens blanked. Translation nodes fell offline. Even the emergency backup lights, hardwired through subterranean mag lines, failed to engage. And then, across every functioning interface, one word appeared. Noise. It blinks once. Then held. 6 minutes passed. No explanations, no demands, no threats. Just that one word. In the 3rd minute, a child on the outskirts of Calais district asked her father why the stars had disappeared. In the 5th, the emergency broadcast channel on Evanti's agricultural moons began transmitting static, laced with fragments of Earth's original distress calls, untouched, unedited, unflinching. By the 6th minute, the panic began. Not because of what was happening, but because nothing was. A complete vacuum of cause. No ships seen, no sensors triggered. It was as if the Concord's crown jewel had been isolated from the galaxy not by weapons, but by intent. When power finally returned, it came all at once. Lights roared back into being, comm nodes hummed to life, broadcast screens flickered. The system rebooted faster than any technician could follow. But something had changed. Every interface, every holographic feed, every planetary seal, each bore a single new icon where the Concord's crest had once been. A Terran mark, obsidian neck, stylized in the shape of an open waveform, a signal crest, framed by 7 radial points. It wasn't aggressive. It wasn't even large, but it was everywhere. From the halls of the Senate to the deepest orbital data mirror, from civilian handhelds to internal military diagnostics, the mark was now the new watermark of every Concord-linked system. A technician tried to reset the core emblem. The system rejected the override. Another attempted a full server purge. The result was a return message: reclassification complete. In the chamber above Europa's frozen sea, Ma stood alone, watching the surveillance playback from Evanti unfold across a curved display. He didn't move. The image of the Terran crest rotating silently above the once untouchable capital was not a prize. It wasn't even a warning. It was a ledger entry, another note in a long, quiet song. He closed his eyes, memory tightening like a vice. He remembered the day Earth's petition for strategic recognition had been dismissed, how the tribunal didn't look at them, how the term insufficient relevance was read without malice, without curiosity, without pause. They didn't hate Earth. They just never expected it to matter. Ma opened his eyes, staring into the digital ether where Evanti's pride had gone dark. "This was never vengeance," he said, voice almost inaudible. "This is what silence builds." Behind him, a young officer stepped into the room. She had witnessed the feed. She had watched the crest bloom across Concord systems like a slow eclipse. Her voice was hesitant. "Sir, is it done?" Ma turned, the weight of 7 years pressing behind his eyes. "No," he said, "nothing ends. We just stopped waiting for them to hear." From orbit, the Terran fleet did not linger. No ships circled Ivanti, no broadcasts followed, no ground deployments. The crest remained as the only trace, like a signature written into the skin of power. The message had been delivered, and it said nothing more than what Earth had always been. The present, overlooked, and now undeniable. In a galaxy that once called them static, humans had become signal. The Concord convened in emergency session for the first time in a century. Not to plan retaliation. There were no battle reports to answer, no invasions to counter. Not to negotiate. Earth had not made demands. The Chamber of Delegates, once an arena of self-congratulation and quiet contempt, was subdued now, its silk-robed senators and crystalline-throned advisors seated in silence, each waiting for someone else to speak first. No one knew how to open a dialogue with absence. In the end, they rewrote the doctrine. Observation Protocol 7 was voided. Category P-43 Rho was reclassified from pre-quantum tier to sovereign autonomous strategic entity. Earth was offered a permanent seat on the High Council, a gesture padded with diplomatic phrasing and ceremonial deference. It was sent through all the proper channels, stamped, sealed, delivered. And Earth never responded. No reply came from Sol, no ambassador accepted the seat, no emissary arrived to fill the marble chair reserved in their honor. It remained empty, polished weekly, watched by all. It was not a snub, it was a conclusion. Earth had already spoken. Above Europa, in the silent drift of a now useless Helix Arc station, Admiral Joran Ma stood before a viewport that no longer needed to hide. The Helix network had been decommissioned, not dismantled, just put to rest. Its nodes shut down without ceremony, their gravitational links released, their silent engines powered down like the final exhale of a long-held breath. No warships remained in orbit, no fleets prowled border systems. The Terran presence had disappeared as quietly as it had arrived. He was no longer in uniform. A modest terminal sat in the corner of the chamber, blinking softly with the rhythm of a single open file. The quiet threshold. His memoir. The only one he would ever write. He hadn't named anyone in it. No battles were recounted, no enemy commanders shamed. There were no stories of heroic sacrifice, no exaltations of tactics or victories. The book did not celebrate conquest, because there had been none. Only course correction. Each chapter was a meditation on consequence, how choices made in administrative silence could shape extinction in slow motion. He wrote about the days no one came, about the refugee children buried in Martian dust, about orbital domes that collapsed, not under enemy fire, but under forgotten obligation. He wrote about how Earth didn't die, it disappeared, folded inward like paper until it no longer needed recognition to be real. The title came from a phrase he'd once spoken to a Helix tech. "We're not building a fleet, we're building a future they'll never see coming." He hadn't known then how complete that would become. From the stars, Earth still looked dim. Its cities, long shifted underground, pulsed in rhythm with geothermal cores. Surface signals were minimal, planetary traffic low. It gave nothing to the galaxy but its absence. And somehow, that had said everything. Behind Ma, a transmission chimed. It was from the Concord. He didn't open it. Instead, he stepped to the desk and pressed his palm to the terminal. The memoir closed. Archived. Uploaded into the Terran Archive node, where it would sit in stillness for any who chose to read. Not pushed, not broadcast, not marketed, just available. He didn't believe in lectures anymore. He believed in echoes. He sat for a long time after that, not watching the stars, but listening to them. Their silence was no longer oppressive. It was full. It was waiting. And as he stood once more, ready to leave the command deck for the last time, Ma whispered the line he had written and rewritten 1,000 times, before settling on the simplest truth. Noise isn't silence. It's the signal you dismissed too soon. Then he stepped back into the quiet, and the galaxy at last listened. What did you think when Earth stayed silent, and the galaxy paid the price? Was Mar a tactician, or something more? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We want to hear your signal through the noise. If you enjoyed this cold, calculated tale of human brilliance, hit that subscribe button for more thrilling HFY stories. Don't miss what comes next.